Well, I'll join everybody else's voice today and wish you a happy Mother's Day. Mother's Day is a day of celebration, day of reflection. It's a day that brings joy to many and complexity to most. Some of us are moms, some of us have or had amazing moms, and some carry grief today for a mother lost, a mother estranged, a child that is gone, or a dream of motherhood never realized. So, let's begin this teaching with a moment of gratitude for all the mothering love in our lives, whoever gave it and however it came. This is a happy Mother's Day from Franklin, one of the Charlie Brown's friends. When our oldest son, Daniel, was 3 years old, Denise and I accidentally left him at church after service one Sunday evening. We had driven 2 cars that evening, which is not unusual when I had an early meeting at the church. And so Denise thought I had Daniel. I thought she had Daniel. And we did not realize the mix-up until we pulled into the driveway, got out of the car, and noticed something was missing, like a whole child. Denise and I looked at each other, and we had that big-eyed, oh no feeling in our faces and in our hearts, that moment that every parent might dread. Well, we rushed back to the church trying to act calm, but inside we were totally panicky. Thankfully, we found Daniel just sitting contentedly in the dark in that big auditorium. Daniel has a great sense of humor, and he now jokes that experience has haunted him for years. It's a whole nother kind of church trauma. But I'm glad Daniel's here today. You probably would like to have the lights turned on, though, wouldn't you? Well, Daniel's not the only child who's ever left at church. Let's look at a story from Luke chapter 2. In that story, Jesus is 12 years old, and he joins his mom and dad and then other people from Nazareth on their annual pilgrimage to Jerusalem for Passover. On the way home, however, Joseph and Mary just thinks that Jesus is with the group somewhere in that caravan, or maybe Joseph thought Mary had Jesus. Mary thought Jesus may have been with Joseph, but he's not. The fact of the matter is, Jesus is lost. Mary and Joseph have lost the Son of God for 3 days. Now, does it get any worse to be entrusted with the Son of God and then lose him? That has to be anybody's definition of a bad day. I wonder if their experience was something like Kevin's mom in Home Alone. You know the story. The family, a very frantic family, leaves on a plane to go to Paris at Christmas time. And it was on that flight that the mother knows she forgot something. Take a look at this. I'm sure that's exactly what Mary said to Joseph. We forgot something. Jesus. It's a curiosity of Luke's gospel to see how the 2 opening chapters of Luke end. These are very long chapters, and they feature some big things: 3 angelic visits, supernatural announcements. They have a song by Mary, a proclamation by the angel, and it all, though, comes into this conclusion. And when it gets to the conclusion of these 2 chapters, we've gone from this awesome supernatural story into a very much down-to-earth situation. A lost child, panicked parents, a frantic search. The whole thing, Luke, starts with angels, and it ends with paging for a lost child on the PA at Walmart. So where was Jesus? After 3 days, they found him in the temple. Jesus had been left behind. Very ironic. And when they found Jesus, he was sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. That's just like Jesus. We would expect him to be listening and asking questions. Children are all about asking questions. How are rainbows formed? How do toilets flush? And eventually those simple questions become very serious questions. Why do people die? Why did my friends say that we're going to hell? This parent expresses the frustration of changing questions. My kid is asking me questions like, what is ethics? And I just want to rewind to the do mermaids know what pants are stage because it was so much easier. At some point in our lives, we quit asking why. And we settle for because. One of my favorite thinkers and poets is Rainer Maria Rilke. He was a Austrian philosopher and poet, raised Catholic, then became a mystic. And he said, the older I get, the more I realize that the questions are more important than the answers. Well, Mary, being a mom, does not say, Jesus, how wise you are. Not at all. She says to him, Jesus, child, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been searching for you in great anxiety. That translation of the Greek word of anxiety is kind of a light-hearted or lightweight translation. It means a deep-seated torment, an anxiety that just wrenches your gut. It's the kind of anxiety that would make you want to cry, scream, and pray, or ground your kid until the second coming. It was just a got to her. So how did Jesus respond? Well, you would think since it was Jesus, he would have apologized. You're right, Mom, I'm sorry. I was very inconsiderate of you and Dad. But that's not what Jesus said at all. He said, why were you searching for me? Didn't you know I would be in my Father's house? There's no apology, no gratitude. It was just, what's wrong? Why are you searching for me? Luke says this about that. He says that Mary and Joseph did not understand what he said to them. That's no big surprise. Parents and teenagers have not understood each other since the beginning of time. I so remember when I was 15 in Little Rock, Mother was driving me somewhere, and some of us, like John, will know what I'm talking about here. But I said, hey, Mom, guess who is coming to Little Rock? And she said, who? I said, well, guess who? And that was a singing group from the late 60s. And I just got so tickled at that. It was almost like that old who's on first type of thing. But teenagers and parents have never really understood each other very well. And it was no different with Mary and Joseph and Jesus. But here's my favorite part. This is what I want us to really focus on. Mary treasured all these things in her heart. That is true, simple wisdom. It's the wisdom that we value, that we are seeking, that we're trying to practice in this community called the Venues. And we're in this series called Choosing Where We Mess Up. And we are admitting that we do make mistakes, that we do mess up, even when it comes to living out the values that we have at the Venues. And the value that we're talking about today is intellectual humility. And so we're going to talk about the fact we're exploring this delicate balance between two extremes. The extreme is, I know everything. The other extreme is, I know absolutely nothing. I grew up in a religious world that claimed to know everything, that they had the truth on everything. And so there are still people in that religious world who have the idea and they put across the fact that they've got it all together, that they've got all knowledge. Franklin Graham says God's laws are absolute. His standards never change. But they do change. Just ask Peter in Acts chapter 10 when God told him, you know all those laws that I said about things you can't eat? It's okay, eat them. God said to Peter, yeah, things do change. Maybe you've heard of John Piper, another evangelical pastor, says, we do not have the right to create our own definitions of truth. God has already spoken. And many times they'll put God as clearly spoken. You know, certainty can sound very impressive, but it can also sound like fear that's dressed up in religious clothes. I'm to the point in my journey where I believe that if our faith has no room for questions and doubts and surprises, then we might not be worshiping God. We might be worshiping our answers. In contrast to John Piper and Franklin Graham, we have these two. C.S. Lewis says, the fact that an opinion has been widely held is no evidence whatsoever that it is not utterly absurd. And then, of course, we honor Pope Francis. This is a bold statement, isn't it? If someone says they have all the answers, that is proof that God is not with them. Yeah, strong. The Apostle Paul writes to the Corinthians, now we see through a glass darkly. Anyone who claims to know something does not yet have the necessary knowledge. Paul wrote about half of the Christian scripture, but he even admits that I don't know everything. I don't know where we got off track with our understanding of humility. So how can we balance these two extremes? I think there's something about Mary that will help us balance the extremes of I know everything, I don't know anything. We can balance this by looking at that verse. Mother treasured all these things in her heart. Mary does not understand Jesus, but she is present with Jesus. And that's the key. She doesn't try to wrap this up in theological language. She doesn't lecture Jesus about respect. She just holds the mystery of what's happening to her. That is intellectual humility. It's not about having all the answers. It's about being open and curious in the face of uncertainty. Intellectual humility says, I don't know everything, but I'm willing to keep learning. I don't have all the answers, but I have love. I'm not perfect, but I am present. I was reminded of this kind of wisdom recently. A well-meaning friend emailed me a message invoking my mother's memory, encouraging me to return to more traditional ways of thinking. She wrote that she was reaching out because she thought, and I quote, my precious friend Jeannie Wright, unquote, would want her to do it. This friend suggested that I had crossed a line, her words, in my spiritual journey, and that I needed to, in her words, repent and return to the beliefs that I had growing up. What struck me in the moment was, you got a lot of nerve. I did not appreciate her using my mother to really communicate, I felt, something that she wanted to say. And I composed a response and sent it, and she responded back, and I responded to her response, and I was honest with her in that second response that I felt like that was inappropriate for her to use my mom. And I said to her that my understanding of my mother and your understanding of my mother are totally different. My mother, as she related to me anyway, had faith conversations that were so different than how she was presented by this friend's email. Mom and I had a lot of rich discussions about faith and theology and about my journey and how I was changing my views on things. And she never used guilt as a teaching tool. She asked questions rather than making proclamations. She listened deeply before ever responding. And most importantly, she trusted my heart and the intention that I had of always following Jesus. Her consistent message to me that just reverberates in my mind is, well, Philip, as long as you follow Jesus, you will be okay. She didn't say, Philip, as long as you interpret the Bible like I interpret it, or as long as you don't change your theology, but just as long as you follow Jesus. I think her humility allowed her to be with me a conversation partner, not a gatekeeper. Parenting is an area that calls us to intellectual humility, and my mom had that. A woman was asked about her parenting strategy. She said, "Oh, honey, I have no idea what I'm doing. I just throw snacks at the problem and hope they don't die." Moms are under a lot of pressure. Moms will be told the extreme, you better know what you're doing, to you clearly don't know what you're doing. It's exhausting. And I think that type of pressure is rooted in a culture that worships certainty and punishes humility and vulnerability. So this Mother's Day, I'm grateful for a mom who modeled how to hold convictions, and Mom did, but she remained very teachable, who understood that love sometimes means letting someone find their own way home. And that's a gift Mom gave to me. I think that's a gift that Mary gave to Jesus. And I want that to be the gift of intellectual humility that we give to each other. We value that in our lives.